It was a rainy afternoon. Of course it was. And from the looks of things, it was only going to get worse as Jeff Amsdale finally left the office. All of his paperwork had been sorted for the day, and there was nothing left for him to do but get off his ass and begin the investigation. Things hadn't been quite right up at the old regional theater lately, and the townsfolk had taken to blaming it on the death of old Tom Leavenworth. Poor bastard died sitting in the seat that he had reserved for himself every performance he attended. He was their premier season ticket holder and fancied himself as much a part of the theater as the pillars that were holding up the roof, though he had never partaken in any of the productions. Jeff never reckoned himself to be much of a thespian. There was too much superstition involved in that lifestyle for him. He was more interested in things that he could define with rational thinking. It's what made him successful as a private investigator. No case he had ever received was ever solved by wearing the same pair of socks, saying a Hail Mary, or the avoidance of famous Shakespearean play titles. Indeed, Jeff ordinarily would have avoided this case altogether if it hadn't been for a letter he had received from his estranged sister, Amy. Though the two had never had a serious falling out, their correspondences had been few and far between for the last several years now. Jeff would reason that as life progresses and becomes more complicated, it was normal enough for people to drift apart, even siblings as close as he and Amy. Unlike Jeff, Amy had been a rather active member of the town's theater community since childhood, and many people had said that she had the talent to go straight to Broadway if only she had tried, but she hadn't. Rounding the final bend of the circuitous uphill drive, Jeff got his first look at the theater where he would be meeting Amy to get to the bottom of all of these rumors. Where once a decadent facility stood as a proud tribute to art and artist alike, there now loomed a decaying behemoth, ominous as an untended headstone. The grass around the theater had grown long and swallowed up the old outdoor seating area where a young Jeff and Amy Amsdale would spend evenings watching Shakespeare in the park. The barn where the sets were stored was leaning over, possibly held up by the sets themselves inside, and a green hue had permeated the towering block walls of the main building, crow nests now lodged in every crevice. "Jesus, this place really has gone to shit," Jeff said to himself as he pulled into the parking lot. The previous lazy patter of the evening's rainfall increased in volume, and was joined by a deep roll of thunder as he climbed from the car. Perhaps the only relief from the horrid appearance of the building itself was the entrance. There had always been something exciting to Jeff about standing beneath the gaudy lights lining the arches of the marquee. On opening nights, the bulbs would flash in patterns almost like their very own dance number as Amy and Jeff waited impatiently for the doors to open. In large cases on either side of the doors, they would arrange displays of shows that were coming soon, or pictures of successful shows from the past, often accompanied by some of the more notable props and costume pieces. Jeff recalled his favorite prop as a child was, aptly enough, the calabash pipe that was the calling card of Sherlock Holmes. Each case was lit by the same gaudy lights which spilled out onto 3 parallel red carpets, the largest leading to the ticket counter and the 2 remaining guiding patrons through the glass entrance doors. There, standing as if in line for a ticket, was a short woman in a long, deep maroon peacoat, her short auburn hair barely curling out from underneath her cream cloche hat. Jeff trotted up beside her as she stood examining the ticket windows. For a moment they simply stood silently side by side as Jeff shook rain from his jacket. He gave a small shiver and turned to Amy. "You are aware there isn't any show here tonight. You didn't have to get all dressed up for this," he said.
"You know what they say about old habits, don't you, Jeffrey? I couldn't resist,"
she said without looking away from the booth. "Nobody calls me Jeffrey anymore, Amy." At this she turned to him and replied,
"Another bad habit, I'm afraid. What say we take a look inside? This case ain't gonna solve itself,"
and strode across the large red carpet to the ticket window.
"Yes, 2 for the closing night of The Case of the Perished Patron. Please, Boris. It should be under Amy."
A brief pause as she continued.
"Yes, we're both very excited. He hasn't been here in ages, and I thought he could use a little cheering up."
Reaching out to receive her pair of pantomime tickets, she bowed and headed for the doors. Pretty dark humor, but a riveting performance as usual, Jeff groaned, giving a half-hearted ovation. How long did it take you to come up with the title?
I'm an artist, Jeffrey. I don't come up with things. The things come up with me.
Fair enough, Jeff replied. He followed Amy inside. He had no idea where the switches were in this damn place, and his eyes weren't getting much help from the marquee lights here in the lobby. Amy continued walking with purpose, leaving him behind. With the little light he had available to him, Jeff could see the design of the carpet where he was standing. He could remember distinctly spending hours as a child in this lobby, waiting for his sister to be finished with rehearsal. He would lay on his stomach and trace the designs with his finger as they twisted and turned from one end of the lobby to the next. It had always fascinated him how each shape would fit together and flowed so specifically and congruently. From a corner, Jeff heard the shuffling of light feet on the carpet. Amy, what the hell are you doing? I'm not here to fuck around. Let's get these lights on so I can do my job. But there was no response. Then came a muffled thud, the splintering of ceramic, and more shuffling. Jeff moved instinctively to investigate the sound. He knew for a fact that there had been a decorative vase that sat on a table in the corner where people would sit during intermission. As he surveyed the lounge, he could just make out the dark outlines of a shattered vase, soil scattered across the ground. Jeff knelt to put his hand to the soil to confirm what his eyes were telling him. But as he did, the shuffling came again. This time the footfalls were heavier, and the pace had quickened. From the opposite side of the room, he made out a shape like a small person running directly at him, holding an object which glinted in the low light. Jeff scrambled to his feet, reached for his holster. What was he going to do? Shoot a child? Where did this thing come from? How did it get around him so fast? It didn't matter. There wasn't enough time to pull the trigger even if he had wanted to by the time the small figure piled headlong into Jeff, knocking him off his balance and causing him to fall backwards against the staircase. Jeff winced as his back made contact with the railing. A loud click sounded throughout the lobby, and the lights flashed on.
What the hell is going on in here? You've been in here 2 minutes and you're already taking a break? Do you private eyes get paid by the hour or something?
Amy shouted, appearing from the utilities door. Jeff looked around, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the light. The little figure wasn't anywhere to be seen. In fact, nothing he had seen in the dark was anywhere to be seen. The old vase that had been shattered was gone, as was the accompanying table and the small couch he had remembered so vividly. In their place was a clumsily stacked row of foldable chairs and some metal music stands. He was not in the familiar lobby of his childhood. The patterned carpet was now a dingy and dull red, which had matched the carpets at the entrance. The posters that once covered the walls top to bottom had been replaced by plaques of what must have been the names of donors and distinguished members of the theater community. It seemed as though they had really tried to class the place up since he had been there last. Jeff rose to his feet and cleared the dust off of his jacket.
Sorry it took me a minute to get the lights on in here. The fuse was blown in the basement, so I had to put my electrician hat on to solve the first part of our mystery. Good to see you're already hot on the trail. Those steps are quite suspect, aren't they?
We aren't the only ones here. I think someone left their kid here. She paused, considering.
That's not very likely, Jeffrey. There haven't been any rehearsals here for a week, according to the bulletin board.
Then continued.
Maybe you saw a ghost. Theaters are always super haunted. And one this old? Gotta be swarms of ghosts all over this place.
Jeff scoffed and followed her toward the auditorium. Where does the make-believe stop with you people? Ghosts and ghouls and goblins?
Don't be ridiculous. Goblins are mythological creatures like dragons or unicorns. They don't haunt anything, and you know that. Besides, we all have our own little fun with make-believe. Some of us are just better at it than others.
Amy gave a playful shrug, swung the door open, and held it there, inviting him to enter. Outside, Jeff could now hear the wind blowing in long, deep gusts against the doors and windows, threatening to blow them open. He entered the auditorium after casting one more look back into the lobby. Turning to face the stage, he realized that yet again, the lights were not on. Only the rectangle of light beaming past him from the lobby revealed a long aisle that ended just before the stage.
The light switch is in the wings. Think you remember your way around well enough to get 'em on?
Asked Amy. I found Mrs. Geldrin's cat Jupiter in a junkyard in a worse storm than we're having tonight. I think I can find a light switch, responded Jeff.
Well, if it's that easy, I'll make it a little more challenging. Let's see how the great Jeff Amsdale fares searching for clues in the dark.
And with that, Amy slammed the door behind her, leaving him yet again in the nearly pitch black of the auditorium. He didn't see any need to join her in her little game, so he decided he could spend this time listening for signs of the haunting people in town had been whispering about. Most of it must simply be people indulging in some much-desired folklore, creating their own stories of what happens in the creepy theater at the top of the hill. It's the same thing that happened with the supposedly haunted junkyard a few months back that, as Jeff had just bragged to his sister, was only the case of Jupiter the cat haunting the grounds after getting lost. Jeff was already beginning to grow a little tired of the whole situation and didn't know how much longer he wanted to wait around in the dark like a fool. He began to walk carefully down the aisle, touching his hand on the back of the seats as he passed them. Again, nostalgia struck him. How often had he been so bored of waiting around in the audience for the intermission to end that he ran slapping the backs of every seat in his path up and down the aisle, much to the annoyance of those still seated. The feel of the metal seat frame inspired the child in him. He began lightly slapping the seats as he progressed toward the stage. The pinging sound of his fingers hitting the seats rang through the vast seating area like a clear bell with every row. He counted each ping. 1. Ping. 2. Ping. 3. Ping. 4. Ping. 5. Ping. Suddenly he felt his arm seized firmly around the wrist by an ice-cold hand. He was pulled toward the seats.
Would you stop that, young man? Where are your parents?
Spoke a harsh, shrill voice close to his ear.
Oh, I hardly recognized you. You're Amy's little brother, aren't you? How is she?
Just as Jeff began to make out the shape of a frail, elderly woman seated before him, her outline misted into darkness, and his wrist was released. Jeff gasped, staggering back and nearly falling into the seat on the other end of the aisle. He stood scrutinizing the darkness, desperately searching for the old woman's outline, but it was gone, and the theater once more was silent. Really letting our imagination run away with us, aren't we, Jeffrey? He thought. Jeff. He corrected himself. Had Amy really gotten to him that easily? Jeff reached the foot of the stage without slapping any more chairs. By this point, his eyes had again adjusted to the dark, and he found that he could actually see quite well simply by the red glow of the exit signs. He took a moment to look out into the seats for any more signs of old ornery women, but again saw nothing. He could see the uniform rows of metal seats, which in the light of day would be that bizarre cream color that had always confused Jeff. Why dark cream of all colors to use for chairs? Black he could understand, but dark cream? Why not brown if the idea was for them to be used exactly like wooden chairs? Now, however, they were all drenched in the red from the signs on either side of him. Before ascending to the stage, he walked the front row to the spot where, it was reported, Tom Leavenworth had passed. Front row about a quarter of the way into the center from house left. It was the only seat in the whole house that remained down even now. Doubtless it was due to the fact that Tom, a rather portly man, sat there for well over 100 shows in this theater. Must have been one hell of a view if he sat here every time. Jeff took a seat in Mr. Leavenworth's chair and looked up at the stage. I don't know about you, Tom, but I can't see shit from up here. You're way too close to the stage to see anything that isn't happening right in front of you. Maybe a good view of the kick line, you horny old creep. He spoke aloud to the chair. No sooner did he finish his sentence than a dim blue light came on from a room on stage right. Who's there? Amy? I thought you knew your way around this place. What's taking so long? When there was still no reply, Jeff again reached into the holster in his jacket, pulled out his gun, and approached the light. Scaling the stage, he quickly walked to the room. He could hear a whirring sound like one of the sewing machines had begun running from behind the door.
I swear to God, Edith, if anyone asks me one more time about the cravats, I'm gonna lose my fucking shit on everybody. Yet again, it becomes my duty to fix everybody's fuck-ups. I'm gonna have everybody come in one day and I'm gonna teach a sewing class because I am done with this. I really am this time.
Came a voice over the whirring. Just as Jeff was beginning to peer in, another figure came bustling past him into the room.
Oh, I hear you, Mags. You know how many times I've had to chase people down for their props since we started this run? Every night since we opened. Every night. It's like, what the hell? Have you never worked in a theater before? Like, be professional.
Jeff rounded the corner, his gun at the ready. There in front of him hovered a most unusual sight, or rather, a pair of unusual sights. Two ghostly visions of women. One, a short and stout middle-aged woman with horn-rimmed glasses and a white button-up blouse, laboring over a sewing machine. And the other a tall and wispy, frail young woman with her hair worn in an extremely messy bun, filled to bursting with various writing implements.
Oh, thank God, I was looking for that one. I can hardly keep track of all the props in this frickin' show. Give it here, sweetheart,
said the thin figure, looking up as he entered the room. Before he could make a single move to stop it, the figure had snatched his gun effortlessly from his hands and threw it into a large plastic box filled to the brim with a myriad of make and models of handguns.
What the fuck is this? What are you doing here?
Jeff gasped, still unable to fathom what he was seeing. The portly woman halted her sewing machine and gave a look of mixed incredulity and disgust.
What are we doing here? Who the hell are you? Actually, skip to who the hell you think you are talking to us like that. We are the ones trying to make this whole shit show run seamlessly.
She rose from her hunched position and advanced toward Jeff.
We are the only two members of this crew responsible for every button, pop gun, and stitch of this goddamn show. So listen up, because we are the only ones in this whole theater who are gonna give it to you straight.
Continued the tall woman, jabbing him sharply in the chest with one long, thin finger.
Let us get back to work, or I am gonna cram that prop gun so far up your ass you're gonna be coughing cork for the rest of time.
The large one bookended the sentiment, and with one heave of her sizable chest, shoved him out of the doorway and slammed the door inches from his face. Jeff stood in awe of the very peculiar event that had just transpired. He reached out his hand and halted a sign which was swaying wildly. Written in very large purple letters, with hasty handwriting, were the words, Costume Workshop, and underneath, much smaller, neater, and intently printed, Plus Props. Jeff composed himself and knocked on the door.
I need to know what you're doing here so late this evening. There are no cars in the parking lot. Is someone coming to pick you up soon?
No reply. Looking down at the small gap between the door and the floor, he saw the dim light had been doused. Jeff tried the door, but it was locked.
Alright, this is officially freaking me out. I have to find Amy and find out what's really going on around here. Either this is some sort of elaborate prank or I'm losing my goddamn mind. Either way, I came here for the truth, not to get dicked around by a bunch of carnival workers.
Lost amidst his own thoughts, Jeff had hardly realized that another voice had begun on stage behind him. The voice rang clear with the sweeping melody of thoroughly practiced recitation. As Jeff cautiously approached, he began to make out the words.
Woe, I saith unto thee, woe, of all tribulations which are to be cast upon this wicked earth, why must this travesty befall my flesh, my blood, my child on this, a most harrowing and unadmirable day?
Another voice chimed in.
Yeah, it's great, but are you going to do it like that for the show? Because they told me I didn't have to do an accent, and I've been doing it normal the whole time.
The first voice replied, breaking character.
There's a reason the script got rewritten in the style of Shakespeare, Gil. Why would you think they'd switch all the words around to read like it's old-timey if they didn't want us to say the lines old-timey?
At this, Jeff stepped out from behind the curtain to meet the newest late-night theater dwellers. Seated at a large desk downstage right was a skeletal structure in a long trench coat and a fedora pulled down over his eye sockets. Sitting across from that structure was another skeleton, but this one was wearing a long, flowing polka-dotted skirt and a white blouse. It also was wearing what appeared to be a gray shoulder-length wig. Jeff approached them in disbelief. The skeleton in the wig noticed Jeff approaching and pointed to him, shouted,
"There he is. See, now we can get to the bottom of this. So listen, how closely does this resemble how it actually went down?"
"How what went down?" Jeff replied.
"The case of the junkyard cat, you moron. What does it look like? I'm Galderin, and this no-accent having lazy bones over here is supposed to be you. Settle this debate for us, will you? Did you or did you not speak in the Queen's English for this case? Because that's what the script says. It's the 8th draft this week, and it's all making less and less sense."
Jeff examined the set. The skeletons remained silent. The only sound was the creaking of the roof and walls against the heavy winds that were still blowing relentlessly outside. He saw that the desk where the trench-coated skeleton was now massaging his temples bore an uncanny resemblance to the very desk he had at his office in town. He went to the desk and, pushing rudely past the skeleton, opened the drawers. The contents of each drawer matched those of his office desk down to the very case number. All of his pens, papers, his work phone, and even the small flask he kept in the bottommost drawer for special occasions, though admittedly lately he had been playing fairly fast and loose with the specialness of it all. "This is my desk," Jeff gasped in wonder.
See, even the real guy can't tell the difference, so start working on your Shakespeare accent, you damn plebeian,"
shouted the wigged skeleton, pointing to the other. "Accent? No, what the hell are you talking about? I don't have an accent. I've spoken like this all my life," interjected Jeff.
Yes! I told you! They did that just to switch it up. This is just like the production of Cats we did, where every character spoke a different language.
Yeah, it's called nuance, Gil.
It's called divisive, Ross. And it's the reason the house lights don't come up at the end of our runs. They don't want us to feel embarrassed.
What's so important about the house lights coming on at the end of the show? Both Gil and Ross fell silent, looking at each other like a pair of children caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Gil heaved a long sigh, removed his fedora, and laid it on the table.
"The moment before,"
whispered Ross expectantly. Then Gil proceeded to speak in an affected accent Jeff could barely recognize as an attempt at Humphrey Bogart.
Listen good and listen close, sweetheart, because I'm the only one in this town who's gonna give it to you straight.
He rose from his seat and approached Jeff, hands in pockets as he continued.
Now, I've done this show a million times, and the only way I know it works is those house lights come on. Don't ask me how, don't ask me why, but it's true. Every night since opening night, it's been true, and it won't be over until it's as true can be, sweetheart. See, it all adds up to those lights coming on at the end of the show. I've got a job here to do, and where I'm going, you can't follow me, doll.
At this, Gil grasped Jeff tightly around the arms and furrowed his brow pleadingly.
I'm no good at being alive, but it doesn't take much to see that the problems of a few ghosts doesn't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. Someday you'll understand that. There. He is looking at you, Jeffy.
Gil gave one long, expressionless look into Jeff's eyes for what seemed like an eternity, and then leaned in to engage in a passionate kiss. Jeff shoved Gil away, annoyed.
"Holy shit, dude. You gave me goosebumps. Did you just come up with that?"
said Ross.
Yeah, I think I did. It just kinda came to me, man.
The two skeletons embraced. "Who's in charge of making all these ridiculous changes? And how does he know so much about me? And why is it a whole production?" shouted Jeff, having finally had enough of whatever nonsense those two figments were going on about.
Oh, hell. The writer? I don't know. I think he has an office stage left just past the bathrooms. Door's usually open, but, no one ever goes in there. He doesn't really socialize with any of the cast or crew, so enter at your own risk of being bored to death. It's probably better that we vacate the space. They're probably going to be putting up the set for the final scene any moment now.
With that, Gil pointed a bony finger vaguely offstage left. Having all the justification he needed to escape the two skeletal scene partners, Jeff stomped away in the direction indicated to him. If there were any new leads to follow in pursuit of answers, he was determined to follow them. He He was going to find this writer and hopefully find out what was truly going on in this theater.
Second electric coming in.
Someone screamed. Jeff heard the sound of the rope being shot through a pulley system at an alarming rate. He looked up towards the rafters and saw that a long horizontal pole, covered tip to tail with as many stage lights as could possibly fit, was bearing down upon him. Before he had a chance to react, he was shoved aside with tremendous force, which knocked him sprawling to the ground. The entire rigging hit the ground with a horrendous crash, bulbs shattered, and lighting fixtures scattered across the stage. Once he had finished a quick inventory of all of his limbs, Jeff stood up and looked around.
Yeah, a little higher, Mark. Yeah, it's too low right there.
Spoke the voice again, seeming not to mind the fact that he had nearly put an end to Jeff. The pole lurched off the ground. The remaining shards of glass spilled out of the canisters. Under the bar where Jeff had been standing only moments ago, lay a mangled pile of bones in a gray wig. Ross had pushed Jeff out of the way of the falling fly system and had been crushed beneath it. Gil came running and fell to his knees before Ross's remains. One arm raised from amidst the wreckage of the lights, and a soft voice cooed.
Gil, is that you? Oh, Gil, I'm afraid I'm not long for this world.
Gil wept and cradled Ross's head. The wig was skewed wildly. He began to cough.
Please, Gil, please do me one last favor. Anything.
Replied Gil solemnly.
If you see my mother, would you tell her that the improv classes she paid for totally paid off?
Suddenly his tone was celebratory. With a snap, the once indistinguishable jumble of remains animated and oriented themselves in the proper places.
Oh, man, incredible! Just incredible! I feel like I was literally watching the lights leave your eyes,
said Gil. Jeff rolled his eyes and heaved an enormous sigh, equal parts relief and exasperation. He turned to continue his previously charted course, but found that his path was obscured by an incredibly large wooden structure. A masterfully crafted set of a storefront. The same storefront which Jeff had often caught himself gazing into, as it was directly adjacent to his work office. Every single detail was just as uncanny an impression as that of the work desk where Ross and Gil had been rehearsing. All details with exception of the name of the store itself. Usually the sign read, Grandin's General Store, but the sign before him had omitted the owner's name. Jeff went to walk around the back of the set piece, when the floorboards of the stage soon began to rattle violently all around him, as if they were being torn up by some enormous unseen carpenter. From the gaping voids between the floorboards, several more buildings rose slowly to create a full-scale replica of each building on his street all the way back in town. Once all had settled, Jeff went door to door and window to window, glancing in to see that each and every structure was impeccably crafted, and could possibly have fooled even the men who had designed the structures themselves.
Pretty damn convincing, huh?
Came the voice of a large man in overalls appearing from within the general store.
The buildings have always been the most believable thing in this whole damn production, if I do say so myself.
The man stood beside Jeff to admire his own work. What happened to the Grandins in the Grandin General Store? Jeff asked.
Well, we put it in there initially, but then the script got changed and we ended up taking it off. Easier than continually making a bunch of signs until he figures out what he's gonna name everyone.
Yeah, people really do seem pretty invested in this little world you've created for yourselves.
Well, it's not for us, it's why it means so much to us. The writer most of all. The guy's been frying his brain, keeping the production engaging, though lately he's been losing his grip. Show's any minute now, and he's been in there scratching away for what feels like years.
I've been hearing a lot about this writer, and to be honest, I'm getting pretty tired of it. For some reason, it's my life that's being observed out here, and he's fucking it all up. With those words, the structures around him leaned and swelled cartoonishly. The windows stretched, the rooftops bulged, and even the font on the storefront signs ballooned and swirled into neon lights. The overalled man sighed disappointedly.
Another rewrite.
Jeff went to push the man out of his way, but instead passed directly through him. He bounded toward the room where Gil had claimed the writer was holed up.
Whoever the hell this is, I'm gonna squeeze the truth out of him if it's the last thing I do. I am done fucking around here. Ghosts or no ghosts, I have to know what's going on.
He turned the corner sharply into the hall. At the far end there was another pale light, this one fainter still than the others. Jeff headed down the hall. The storm outside grew stronger still, and the rain and winds pounded harder and harder against the weakening structure, which began swaying to the point of nearly buckling. Jeff came to the open door, then threw it into a small room with a short desk, slammed his fist down in front of a seated figure and sneered.
Listen, I clearly don't know what the hell is going on around here, but I plan on finding out one way or the other. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, and if you do as I say and answer all my questions, you won't have to explore the latter. Question 1.
Who put you up? He suddenly stopped, and the pulsing of the building was halted in turn. Sat at the desk, he saw himself. This was just a much more tired replica of him. Hunched over an old typewriter atop a desk festooned with loose, text-ridden papers, sat Jeff Amsdale. The same broad shoulders, the same greasy brown hair, and the same tired eyes, only seemingly further sunken by the deep shadows underneath them. His stain-ridden white button-up shirt rolled up to his elbows, and his head hung low in weariness.
"Hello, Jeffrey," he said. "I was hoping you might come around one of these days. Please sit. I know you're tired, and dare I say, confused."
Jeff said nothing. He stared at his weary mirror as he sank slowly into a chair.
You're a smart man, Jeff. You've always looked for the truth in things. You hear what people say, and you search for the things that they mean to say. Unfortunately, we're only polar opposites in one way. You look for the truth in people who are trying to tell lies. Petty thieves, cat burglars, philanderers. I look for the truth in the people who want to be honest. Artists, dreamers, people rationalizing their lives.
Jeff sat still, trying to form a thought, but his mind had gone blank. The other Jeff continued.
You want to know who put me up to this? Well, funnily enough, you did. You trusted me to help you. I tried to help you the only way I know how.
He grabbed a handful of papers on either side of him and shrugged defeatedly.
But the truth is that even I couldn't do it. I couldn't tell you what you needed to know, and I couldn't keep the story straight anymore. I started stylizing the production to distract you, but I should have known you'd get to the bottom of this eventually. Unfortunately for me as a playwright, no matter the stage direction, the costumes, the lights, the words, it would never be authentic until I had the right cast. And now that I have the right cast...
He gestured to the door. Amy now stood there, silent and listening. No longer in her overcoat, but donning a black dress with matching gloves and a veil.
It's out of my hands and into yours. That's where your truth begins.
Amy came to Jeff's side and held out her hand.
Come on, Jeffrey. It's time for the finale.
Jeffrey took Amy's hand and she began to lead him down the hall. Now every room he passed bustled with ghostly crew members diligently carrying out their duties. Ethereal mists raised and lowered fly systems. Various skeletal figures shuttled trays of ornate glasses and plates to and fro. Hovering visions ran needle and thread through swatches of fabric. Between the curtains, Jeff could see sets hurriedly being rolled onto the stage. Mags and Edith ran alongside him. Mags forced him into a black trench coat. Edith slipped a neatly sealed envelope into his free hand and threw a scarf over his neck. Jeff's heart now began to pound with excitement and horror.
What's happening, Amy? What am I supposed to do? I don't know this show. I feel strange. I feel afraid. I don't want it,
stuttered Jeff as she stood him just off stage. The work lights were being dimmed as though a show was about to begin.
Jeffrey, everything is going to be okay. All you have to do is meet me on stage when the lights come up and be honest. You're going to be amazing. I promise. I love you, Jeffrey. Be brave and break a leg.
With that, Amy kissed Jeff on the forehead, and all the lights went out. There wasn't a sound. There weren't any lights, nor a thought heard even in Jeff's crackling mind. A voice whispered,
"You're on, Jeff."
and he was ushered on stage. He entered in darkness. The padding of his footsteps split through the silence in the theater, like the cracks of the thunder that tonight's storm had previously brought. He stopped about a third of the way to the center of the stage and tried to make out any outlines of the set, but saw nothing.
All you have to do is meet me on stage when the lights come up and be honest. You're going to be amazing. I promise. I love you, Jeffrey. Be brave and break a leg.
Recalled Jeff. He took a deep breath in to calm himself. The theater air was cold and dense, refreshing as a gulp of cool water. He exhaled. His hands stopped shaking. His mind stopped buzzing. He drained until he could feel only the very tips of his fingers. Then the sound of a light shutter opening broke the silence, and a single cone of light revealed the only other presence on stage. Center stage was occupied by a single coffin. Not ornate by any means, in fact it was rather plain. There was no symbols and no gold lining. The coffin was closed, but even as he approached, Jeff heard once more in his mind these words.
All you have to do is meet me on stage when the lights come up and be honest.
Jeff stood over the simple coffin and examined the letter which was handed to him. Another exact replica of the letter he had received regarding his sister. He opened the envelope, which revealed only the following information. Visitation of Amy Amsdale, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Sunday, May 17th, 1991. Join us in celebrating a life of love.
Be honest.
I never believed it.
Whispered Jeff, dropping the envelope and letter. That's what this is all about, isn't it? I wanted so badly to never have to accept that I never got to say goodbye. So every day I looked around at everything that was still standing around me, and I told myself that if the buildings were still there, and the people were still working their same jobs, and if I wore this same old shirt, then you must also be right there where I left you. But that wasn't true, and soon enough, wherever I looked, no matter how similar the things around me appeared, I never saw them the same again. They started to distort the longer I would look at them. God, I've hated it here without you. But you'll never know that, and it's killing me. Jeff took another breath. I got so sick of not being able to be honest with myself, I went out looking for ways to prove that all the other folks in town were lying to each other and themselves, just like I was, like I am. You died 7 years ago today, and I miss you. But I know that wherever you ended up, you'll be the brightest light for miles. He bent down and kissed the smooth wood coffin. As he rose, he heard the beginning of a smattering of applause. It gradually grew into a thunderous applause, accompanied by cheers and whistles. Jeff looked around and saw that the whole cast of characters that he had met since arriving were standing around him, postured to bow. He looked out into the house from the stage. A full house of spirits, ghouls, ghosts, and even Tom Leavenworth himself in the front row were standing and clapping and cheering as Jeff and the rest of the cast took a bow. The house lights grew brighter and brighter until it swallowed all of the figures into it. Then suddenly, the light from the house condensed into a small, powerful light which floated down from the ceiling into the center of the stage, where it sat atop a single, thin, black post on wheels. The theater's ghost light was finally lit. Jeff smiled, followed the green exit signs out of the theater, drove back into town the same way he came, returned to his office, put away his files, took out his flask from the bottom drawer, took a long draft, and began to softly weep as the sun shined its first morning light in through his window at last.